Well, hey, good morning. Thanks for checking in. It's now 5:20 a.m. on November 17th, and I got up at 4:30 this morning. Our animals decided to start moving around and making noise at 3:30, and that wasn't fun, but got up on time afterwards, got them fed, and now I'm out in the office. As an author update, I feel like I didn't accomplish as much as I wanted to last week, but when I actually write down in my notes, it seems like I did. I think word count wise, I'm not where I want to be, and I'm not sure why that is. Like, I feel like I had time last week. I just, with Lissa's Vengeance, there still are a number of things with this book that I feel like I did not plot it out well enough, because what is holding me up is not knowing what I want to do in any given section. And once I know what I want to do, and I have figured that out in the past week, I will knock out 3,000 words. It's just getting to that and figuring it out. So with the next book, I really plan to just do a lot of release detailed outlining so that I don't run into this problem again, because I want to get the next book done a lot faster, obviously. And it's pretty frustrating to me that I'm not there where I want to be. So yeah, I am making progress though. Like, I just wrote a sequence that I think is really great. And one of the things I'm happy about with this book is I feel like there's a lot of rule of cool and a lot of stuff that once I've done writing it, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's awesome. People are going to love that. And so that's another reason I just really want to get this book out in the world, because it has so much of that. And I've been sitting on it for so long and I wanted to get it out there. So that was pretty awesome. Like, basically it was kind of a little standalone bit about a character that is in the midst of a space battle, and she's the daughter of an admiral that we have spent a lot of time with. And there was a later rescue sequence I had written where some characters have to basically do kind of a space jump through the debris left over from a recent space battle. And so one of the tropes about asteroids, is that asteroids just are not as close together as people think they are, and how they're shown in in movies and things like that. Like, asteroids could be hundreds of thousands of kilometers apart. The actual asteroid belt is widely spread out. It's just that space is so big that from a distance, or even on maps that try to depict that, they look close together. And you kind of have to come up with excuses or reasons why any sort of debris would be close together like that. Like, things would still be knocking against each other and all sorts of kinetic energy being reflected back and forth. And that's why I wanted to do a space battle, like the debris left over, because that was kind of an opportunity to have people jump through that and show all that wild, stuff hammering into each other, like reflected light from the sun and what that's going to look like. And then they basically are jumping to the remnants of this ship so they can save this character that basically had to save herself by getting in battle armor and going into kind of a freeze mode. Well, I actually had left 2 chapters because Mallory, my co-writer, really loves writing space battles. And I still think there will probably be some additions if she wants to do that, I hope, of other aspects of the space battle. But I wrote a whole sequence of basically the character being caught in a ship that explodes, has to put on an expedient spacesuit, and then needs to figure out what to do and get to the armor while the piece of debris she's on is still spinning and hammering into things and getting hit and stuff like that. And so that was fun to write. And I'm hoping it comes across the way that I wanted it to. But it felt like it took a while to get there. And the things that are left in the book, I have 3 main things that are left that I need to finish out. And I now have a really good idea of how I want to do those things. So it's really just a matter of getting that done. And yeah, then it'll be on to the next thing. I put a little bit of time into preparation for my panel with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association online conference that they did this weekend called Quasar. SFWA is wanting to do more kind of smaller events spread out through the year, which I think is a great idea. And this was an online panel about author resilience and mutual resilience and how to build community and things like that. And I was probably on this this committee because of the work I do with the Wordos here in Eugene, which is a long running writers group. And the main thing that I wish we'd had more time to talk. It felt like an hour just went by way too fast. And we only got to touch on a few aspects. Like we talked about solar punk, and we talked about ways to build community or find community if you know, you don't know other writers in your area, or if you don't have writers in your area, finding them online, and how that can be, they're definitely out there. It just can be hard to find them. So, that was really great. I mean, another author who was on the panel with me, Curtis Chen, basically went through what has become a kind of common story these days, where he had a series, 2 books of that series were traditionally published, and then the contract went away, and he had to decide what to do with that, and he ended up self-publishing book 3. And so some of that conversation was what kept him going, really. And that's a story that a lot of people are going through. So I think, if you're listening to this and you're a writer that finds yourself in that situation, I think Curtis is a good person to look to. Tim Akers is a good person to look to. There are a lot of writers. Nina Hoffman, who is in my group, she has always done a really good job of repurposing so many of her stories that were previously published. And she's gone through, there was a publisher called Open Road that, I'd have to research this if they're still doing it. For a long time, they were picking up a lot of writers that had stuff that had come out of copyright and was publishing it for them. And that was a little frustrating to see friends doing that, because it felt to me like it's not a hard, they have the skills to do this on their own. I think some people don't want to do it, and that's fine, or actually don't feel as comfortable with technology as they could, and that's also fine. But Nina did publish her own stuff, and then the hard part becomes the marketing. And so for her, the marketing has always been writing the next thing. And Nina's career is really inspirational to me, because she has been publishing for, I think 50 years at this point, between short stories and novels. And she doesn't quit. She comes to the group, she shows up, she provides feedback, she teaches. Her life is really just the writer's life, but she puts in the work. And so I just really find that inspiring. And so that was part of what Curtis touched on as well, was like putting in the work, being part of, like, for him, in his case, it was fans asking for the next book that was one of the things that spurred him forward to keep going. And for me personally, groups have really just helped me when I felt like, going through all the stuff I did with my mom and my own health things, like sleep apnea, basically just stealing my brain. It was friends that kind of kept me on point, and friends who are writers that know what I'm going through. So I was really had a good time with that, and I'm glad that we got to do it. After that, I got intrigued by a short story idea. So this was a little bit of a, playing rabbit and going off on a, rabbit hole. But Raconteur Press, actually, I got an email from them because they said they were extending the deadline on a story called, or a anthology called Insert Coin. And I'm intrigued by the idea. I wanted to write a story that was kind of lit RPG, but, being a portal fantasy of being pulled into the world of a game, and also a game that is Final Fantasy, which is a game I played a lot of. And so yeah, I've started a story about 2 sisters who know they have an older sister who all they've been told is that she died, and they don't know actually what happened to her. They do know that their dad doesn't like to play video games. It makes him cry. And they find an old arcade cabinet in the barn that was covered with a tarp and hidden away from a previous move. And they start playing it and get sucked into the game. And in the game, their sister is actually the evil sorceress that you think is the bad guy in the game. And so it's going to be about how they can save her. I've only got 8,000 words to do that. I'm already at about 2,000 words. So the deadline is the 28th of November, which should be plenty of time to get that done if I just do, even 1,000 words a day between now and then. But that was a little bit of a squirrel. It's not the thing that is the most important thing to do right now. But I do find that it helps me to work on 2 things at once. Like, I will kind of divide up my writing time and spend 30 minutes working on one thing, and then 30 minutes working on, like, the long-term thing, like Alyssa's Vengeance. And that really helps me increase my word count. Like I kind of find like maybe my brain is working in the background on the other thing while I'm working on something else. So it is actually helpful to me. And I want to, like I've said, it's a goal of mine to do more short stories. So to do that, you have to write them. But I've also been thinking that I need to be really more intentional about the short stories that I do write. And so writing them for prompts, following prompts. Apex Magazine has a flash fiction prompt, and I've got a story into them right now. So until I get the rejection back on that, I can't submit anything for a flash piece they have. But every month they do a themed flash like submission. So I'm doing that. I also, this last week in reading, I am trying to get away from, like, I have managed to eliminate a lot of social media from my life, and I am trying to get out of wasting time reading the news, because ultimately I think the news just doesn't change. You'd probably be okay reading the news on a 90-day basis, but, well, some things. And also podcasts. I find that the podcasts I listen to tend to get really repetitive, especially if they are kind of current events based. And I don't feel like I've accomplished anything after I do that. So I did spend this week trying to very consciously listen to fiction or nonfiction, like on my phone, rather than listening to audiobooks. And I pushed myself back into doing more reading. And so I read the latest Apex magazine, and I read the latest, I'm halfway done with the latest Clark's World. And I think I'll have some ideas I can share kind of about themes, but I'd also like to read a couple more issues before I talk about that. I've had subscriptions to these magazines forever. Like, I want to support them, but I'm pretty bad about reading them. And that's something I would like to be better at. Obviously, I'm a person who, I want to write short stories. I need to read more of them, right? More consistently, and the current short stories that are being published. So that's something I'm working on. 2 books I picked up this week. The first one was There Is No Anti-Memetics Division by, I always mess up his name, but QNTM. And this is a book that kind of came out of the SCP community, which, if you're not familiar with that, the SCP Foundation was a long-running website where people would, it's kind of amalgamation of the X-Files and like eldritch horror in a way. And the idea of like objects of power. If you've played the game Control, like, it draws heavily on the idea of what the SCP did. And people would basically do fan fiction making up these objects that were imbued with power from some event or something. And then there would have to be containment procedures on how they attain the object, what it did, and then how they control it, which SCP, secure, contain, protect. And it was one of those things, like almost like the original creepypasta, where you would, could really just go down the rabbit hole reading these things. And some of them were just, terrifying how people came up with this. And QNTM has been self-publishing for a while, and kind of came to my attention because sometimes you see a book, and especially like an indie published book, and you just wonder, like, what is the sauce here? Like, how is it doing as well as it's doing? Especially if the cover isn't, I don't want to say not great, but not covering not following the conventions of what other sort of indie covers look like. And QNTM's books kind of followed that. Like, they have a lot of reviews, they're well reviewed, and they tend to stick pretty well with Amazon. And that's kind of what pulled me into reading them. And they are really good. Now that he is traditionally published and got that contract, he had to like put his name on things. And so now that I know he's a he from the UK, but before, like, not knowing that was sort of like, I guess if I didn't read his other things that were online, so maybe that information was already out there, but it also felt to me like kind of fitting to the sort of work he was doing, that he was doing it behind a pen name like that, or not even a pen name, but sort of a, very abstract, acronym as what he was writing from. So that was always kind of cool. And the book was more, felt to me like a collection of short stories, but I enjoyed it. It's about things that I like, which are, governments trying to control things they can't control, the effects of that, memory, and basically anti-memetics is about the idea of a thing that if you read it, it erases your memory. And it's a great book. So, but it has also been heavily re-edited, apparently. So I still have the original ebook. I'm very curious to read the the print version and see how it may have changed, at least from what I remember. It's also just a beautiful book. Like if I ever have a book that's this beautiful, I will be very happy as far as how it was, put together. The layout is just super nice, and there, yeah, I would be so happy to have a book that looks like this. So that's great. Another one that I picked up at my local library, Could, Should, Don't, Won't, How We Think About the Future by Nick Foster. And I'm always interested in futurists and how they approach things. This guy, I think, is mostly an industrial designer, but seems like he's also done a lot of TED Talk kind of things about how we consider the future or what things we're doing now that move into the future. And so that is something I don't know. I'm curious I don't know. We'll see if I actually stick with it, but it was intriguing and I've already read the first chapter, so I'll do my best to keep with it. I'm also reading 4 Minutes by Andrew and Wilson. It's co-written, and sorry, I don't have a picture of it, but it's on Amazon. And it's a thriller, but I would say it's pretty firmly science fiction, but it's absolutely written from the thriller perspective. Like the main character is an, operator, and the book moves in a way like all of the characters are thriller type characters, but it does spend a lot of time thinking about the idea that it has and how it works and coming up with rules around why it has to work the way it does. And it's kind of funny because as soon as I think to myself, like, well, wait a second, what about this? Did you think about that? The characters ask the question, and then it gets, hand waved about why we can't do something. So at this point, like, it's done a good job of setting up a kind of a blue team and a red team. You have reasons to like the red team, although you don't understand what they're doing. And there's definitely a high stakes event that happens that, I'm pretty much at the midpoint right now. So that the bad thing has happened. And now I'm kind of curious if we're going to get like a 3/4 reversal or what that's going to look like. So I listened to that mostly all day yesterday, and I had to do a lot of driving yesterday. So it was really good for that to keep me focused. And one thing I want to mention about Anti-Memetics Division, which I would like to talk about some more, but I think I saw a post about this on Reddit. And I've been thinking about it because I have been following some writers. Like basically the post on Reddit was sort of opining that all traditional publishing has to do now is sit back and wait for certain indie writers to rise to the top, and then they can offer them a publishing deal. And this book might be kind of like that. Matt Dinniman's Dungeon Crawler Carl kind of blows that out of the water, although he now has that deal. But then Michael Sullivan has been doing it for years. And so I'll probably do a whole video on this as I think about it. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. But I do think discoverability is always going to be, does not hurt you. Absolutely. So it does really seem like agents and publishing houses are absolutely paying attention to, Kindle Unlimited has kind of become just another social media data point for books. I want to get more, and writers, I want to say. So I want to get more thoughts together on that. But this book is an example of that. Like, obviously, I found it as an indie. It got picked up. It went off the market for a long time. Well, I guess it went through their editing process, and now it's back out in the world. So we'll see, how it does. I was just at a Barnes & Noble this weekend, and I guess this isn't a good metric because it wasn't launched yet. Like, I think Saturday might have been its actual launch day. And so I got the book yesterday. So that would make sense why it wouldn't be in bookstores yet. But that's never a good metric because, it really seems like a crapshoot on how a book gets into a bookstore. And then even so these days, Barnes & Noble they say they have put a lot more impetus on local managers to decide what is going to be in their bookstores. And that was one thing that was really interesting to me. I was at the Barnes & Noble in Clackamas Town Center in Portland, and they had just a really interesting mix of science fiction. Like, coming from retail like I do, it's all about foot space, right? Like, how much foot space do you devote to any given thing? Bikes take up a whole lot of shelf space, but the margin on bikes is actually razor thin. $100 bike back in the day, like I think now it's $200 is the base price for a bike, but it used to be the store would make like $1 on that bike, whereas toilet paper is a product that costs 30 cents and they make 90% margin on it, so they're okay with having 24 feet devoted to toilet paper. Well, Dune takes up so much shelf space, at least at this bookstore. It sure did. Dune, John Scalzi, of course, was probably a good 18 inches. But then there was some other stuff that really surprised me, like John Brunner, Ursula K. Le Guin, of course, always gets a lot of shelf space. But there was other, like a Harry Harrison book, like several of his books have been reprinted. He's a 60s to 70s era science fiction writer. So there was just a lot of stuff that surprised me. And if houses are, like, obviously, if they don't have to pay the writer or pay the writer's estate, maybe it's, slap a new cover on a book, make it look more contemporary, and make some money. So, yeah, that was interesting to look at. I actually find our Barnes & Noble, my local one, their inventory just doesn't change that much. And also the pricing is just, it really seems priced for, like, people wanting to buy gifts who are not very price conscious. So they're willing to pay $30 for a hardcover book or $20 for a trade. And I'm just not willing to do that. I've also moving more and more to, unless I really want the book, I'm going to buy it in ebook format because I don't have room for books anymore. So Lego is pushing out some of my shelf space. And that's been an interesting transition. Maybe I'll talk about that at some point. So, goals for this week. I would just love to get Lissa's Vengeance finished, and we'll see where we get there. I'm at 96,000 words on that manuscript. So once I push 100, it's time to wrap things up, right? So we'll see where we get with that. I'll finish 4 minutes. I would love to do a review of that this week, so I'll get that done. I am finding a little bit that doing video is taking some of my mental focus away from writing, and that's not what I want. That's not why I'm doing this. Although I kind of do want to do a video this week that'll be one of those intro things for the channel to talk about why I'm doing this. And it's not purely selfish. I'm hoping that it's helpful to somebody, but it does help me to write this stuff down. But I think I am going to start adding, like, at least word counts and things like that as a comment, so I can just easily go back and see that, because I forgot, like, what my word count was at last week for Lissa's Vengeance, and kind of don't know how much I accomplished there. So I would like to be able to go back and see that. Yeah. The other thing that happened this week, which was a very big deal, was I went to a funeral yesterday, and it was a friend of mine that was a roommate in college, and he died pretty young. Like, he was 2 years younger than me. Leaves behind a 9-year-old son, and the memorial yesterday was, I'll probably maybe have some other thoughts about this, but it was just, there were easily 200 people there, and it was so amazing to see that and how many people came out for him. And I hadn't seen him since I was maybe 22. And so to see that in his life, how many people he had touched really was a special thing. And as I just turned 50 this year, and as I've started to lose more and more people younger than me or of the same age, and you realize that they have hit their end point, it definitely makes me feel like, any time I have is valuable, and I need to really focus on things that aren't wasting that time. So I'd like to gather more thoughts about this, but it's really strange. And I just was so touched how many people were there for him. That was amazing to me. Not amazing because he wasn't a good person. He was a good person. Amazing just that how many people a life can touch, that was the piece. So anyway, hey, thank you. Let me know what your goals are for the week if you want to share, because I'd love to hear it. And if you want to check out some other update videos, there's now like 4 of them, I think. So those are also in the back catalog. So take a look at those. And yeah, Right on. I'll see you next week.